For most of human history, the world was not connected. It was clustered, fragmented. Civilizations grew up in river valleys, along coastlines, and behind mountains, anywhere that seemed defensible and had decent access to water. They developed their own languages, technologies, religions, and political systems, often with very little awareness of what lay beyond the next horizon. If something existed far away, it might as well have not existed at all. By the last centuries BCE, a loose network of trade routes had begun to stretch across the Eurasian landmass. It emerged from countless local exchanges stitched together over time. A road from one city met another road from the next city, which eventually met a third, and so on, until, somehow, against all odds, goods, people, and ideas could move across half the world. Later historians would call this network the Silk Road. Terrible name, honestly. It wasn't one road. It wasn't mainly about silk, and for most of its existence it barely worked. Calling it the Silk Road is like calling the internet the cat video highway, but for a brief and extraordinary moment in history, it worked better than anyone had any right to expect. This is the story of that moment, and why it couldn't last. Let's get one thing straight right from the start. The Silk Road was not a continuous highway running from China to Europe. There was no ancient equivalent of I-95 with rest stops and exit signs reading Constantinople, 3,000 kilometers. It was a shifting, chaotic web of routes that changed constantly depending on politics, climate, war, and opportunity. Some paths ran north of deserts, others south. Some hugged mountains for protection, others crossed open steppe. Routes opened, closed, and reopened elsewhere. No single person ever traveled the entire thing. That's not how it functioned. Goods moved in stages, passed between merchants like the world's slowest relay race. A merchant might carry silk from one Chinese city to a Central Asian market, sell it to another trader, and never see it again. The trader would move it further west. Someone else would pick it up after that. By the time the bolt of silk reached the Mediterranean, it had passed through dozens of hands, cultures, and currencies. This fragmentation mattered. The Silk Road had no central authority, no unified laws, no consistent protection, no one to call when things went wrong, which they frequently did. It survived because enough people benefited from it enough of the time to keep showing up. Silk flowed west, silver flowed east. Spices, glassware, horses, paper, and precious stones moved in every direction. So did stories, religious ideas, technologies, and rumors, most of which got increasingly distorted with every retelling. The Silk Road connected the world, but it did so loosely, imperfectly, and at enormous cost to anyone foolish or desperate enough to use it. To understand just how fragile this system was, imagine the experience of someone actually using it. Picture this. Somewhere along the route, a merchant prepares to move goods to the next city. He knows this stretch of road. He does not know the next one. That's a problem for future him. He has guards because he has to. He has bribes ready because he has to. He carries weapons because literally everyone does. Every border crossing is a negotiation. Sometimes it's a legitimate toll. Sometimes it's extortion, wearing the disguise of a legitimate toll. Sometimes the official in charge decides today is a great day to confiscate everything you own just because he can. There is no appeal process, no complaint department, no regulatory body to file a grievance with. You just lose your stuff and go home. Currencies change constantly. What's accepted in one city is worthless in the next. Laws are intensely local. What's legal here might get you executed there. Contracts mean absolutely nothing once you leave the city where they were written. If you are robbed, injured, or killed, that's simply the end of your story. No investigation, no justice. Violence wasn't an interruption to trade. It was part of the operational budget. Journeys took months or years. Markets shifted while merchants were still on the road. which meant you could leave with a cargo hold full of valuable goods and arrive to discover nobody wants them anymore. News traveled slowly and unreliably. A city that was prosperous and welcoming when you left might be at war when you arrive, or sacked, or gone entirely. This was the Silk Road at work. It functioned, but barely. Here's the thing about the Silk Road. Nobody owned it, and that was kind of the whole point. Sure, empires tried. They taxed the hell out of caravans passing through their territory, set up checkpoints, stationed soldiers at key passes. But the Silk Road was thousands of miles of desert, mountain, and steppe. You could control your slice of it, maybe, but the whole thing? Impossible. And if you squeezed too hard, merchants just left. They'd find another route, another mountain pass, another city willing to pay ball. The trade would flow around you like water around a stone. But here's where it gets messy. Over time, that delicate balance, the one that kept everything running, started falling apart. The route began splintering into smaller and smaller pieces, more kingdoms, more warlords, more greedy little rulers who saw merchants as walking ATMs. Every border crossing meant another toll, another bribe, another inspection fee that was really just extortion with paperwork. And bandits? They had a field day, because when nobody's really in charge, the guys with the swords make the rules. So merchants adapted. They hired more guards, took longer routes, paid more bribes. Because what else were they going to do? But you can only adapt so much. Slowly. So slowly you wouldn't even notice at first. The Silk Road started to thin out. Fewer caravans, smaller profits, higher risks. The Silk Road was still technically alive, but so is a guy walking around with internal bleeding. And that's the scary part, because thin systems, they look fine, right up until they snap. By the early 1200s, the Silk Road was still there, technically, but it was running on fumes, held together by habit, momentum, and merchants who didn't know what else to do. And then something happened that nobody saw coming. Something that would change everything. Also, if you're still here and not completely bored out of your mind, go ahead and hit that like button. Section 4. The Arrival of the Mongols. From the eastern steppe came a force unlike any the settled civilizations of Eurasia had faced before. The Mongols were nomads. Their entire society revolved around horses, movement, and survival across vast, inhospitable distances. They were not tied to cities. They were not dependent on farmland for infrastructure. They were, above all else, mobile. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan, they unified into a single political and military entity and began expanding outward with astonishing speed. Their conquests were devastating. Cities that resisted were destroyed. Populations were massacred as examples. The reputation of Mongol violence spread faster than their actual armies. Often, cities would hear the Mongols were coming and just surrender immediately. This brutality was real, and it was intentional. Let's not sugarcoat it. But it also served another purpose. It cleared the map. Fragmented political authorities vanished overnight. Borders simplified dramatically. Local resistance collapsed. Within a few decades, most of the Silk Road, from China to Eastern Europe, fell under a single imperial system. One government, one military, one set of rules. Then something unexpected happened. The violence stopped. Once the Mongols secured control, they didn't want chaos. They wanted predictability. Conquest is expensive. You need revenue. Revenue requires trade. The Mongols themselves didn't produce luxury goods. They were nomads, not artisans. But they needed access to those goods. They understood that long-distance trade only worked if merchants could actually move without being murdered every 50 kilometers. So they rewrote the rules completely. Merchants traveling under Mongol authority received official passes guaranteeing safe conduct. Harming a merchant with one of these passes was a capital crime, not a fine, not imprisonment, execution, swift, public, and memorable. This was enforced ruthlessly. Weights and measures were standardized across the empire. Multiple currencies were accepted at official exchange rates. Contracts were honored across regions, which was genuinely revolutionary. Laws became consistent. Harsh, yes, but consistent. You knew what the rules were, and you knew what would happen if you broke them. The Mongols built infrastructure. Relay stations appeared across the empire every 30 or 40 kilometers, stocked with fresh horses, food, and shelter. Messages that once took months to deliver could now travel in weeks, sometimes days. For the first time in the Silk Road's entire history, information moved almost as fast as goods. A merchant still faced danger, bandits, weather, accidents, disease. But it was predictable danger, calculatable risk instead of pure chaos. Predictability changes everything. Historians have a name for this period, the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it, like calling a protection racket a security service. Because this wasn't peace through diplomacy or treaties or goodwill. This was peace through terror. The kind where everyone's on their best behavior because they've seen what happens when you're not. The Mongols didn't negotiate. They didn't need to. Their reputation did the work for them. Mess with a merchant, your city burns. Rob a caravan, your entire region gets made into an example. And word traveled fast, so most people just didn't. And here's the wild part. It worked. For the first time in centuries, the routes actually stabilized. Merchants didn't need to hire small armies anymore. Travel times got cut in half, costs plummeted, trade exploded. Suddenly, silk from China was showing up in European markets regularly. Not as some rare, mythical commodity, but as actual trade goods you could count on. Silver poured east by the ton. Paper, gunpowder, spices, entire technologies, all flowing across continents like never before. For about a century, the Silk Road became something it had never really been before, a system that actually worked. This transformation reshaped daily life in ways that are easy to overlook. Merchants could plan, not perfectly, this was still the medieval world, but enough. They could calculate risk instead of simply enduring it. They could forecast profits, secure financing, make multi-year commitments. A class of professional traders emerged. People who specialized in logistics and contract negotiation rather than just survival skills. Cities along the route flourished. Markets expanded exponentially. Consumers in one part of the world gained reliable access to goods from thousands of kilometers away, things their grandparents would have considered impossibly exotic. Cultural exchange accelerated. Religious traditions spread along the trade routes. Scientific knowledge traveled. Astronomical tables, medical texts, mathematical concepts, all moving between civilizations that had barely been in contact before. Artistic styles blended, architectural techniques spread. This is when figures like Marco Polo appear in the historical record. He wasn't unique. He wasn't even that special. He was a symptom of a system that suddenly allowed individuals to traverse enormous distances with relative safety and return home to tell the tale. The world felt smaller, more connected, more knowable. But interconnected systems carry more than just benefits. Efficient trade networks don't discriminate in what they carry. Along with silk and silver came disease. Pathogens hitched rides with merchants, traveling the same efficient routes at the same unprecedented speeds. Local outbreaks became regional crises. Regional crises became continental disasters. The Black Death spread along Silk Road trade routes, killing somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population. It moved fast because the network was efficient. It spread far because the network was connected. The system was now too integrated to fail in isolation. A problem anywhere could become a problem everywhere. Political stability, meanwhile, proved temporary. The Mongol Empire fractured. Competing successor states emerged, each claiming legitimacy and no one willing to cooperate. Central authority weakened. Enforcement declined. The rules that had made the system work started to matter less. As protection faded, old problems returned. Banditry increased. Routes destabilized. Trust began to erode. The very efficiency that made the Silk Road flourish made its decline faster and more catastrophic. You know what makes trade networks actually work? Everything has to line up. The politics, the economics, the bureaucracy. And not just in one place, across thousands of miles of territory controlled by dozens of different rulers. Getting all that to line up? Hard. Keeping it lined up? Nearly impossible. When the Mongol Empire started tearing itself apart, breaking into several kingdoms run by cousins who hated each other, the Silk Road lost the one thing that had made it actually function: unity. The route started shifting again, following new borders and new alliances. Trade broke back down into smaller regional chunks. Local rulers saw their chance and took it. More tolls, more regulations, more hands in the cookie jar. All those old problems, they came roaring back. Costs went up, risks went up, profits went down. But the Silk Road didn't just end. There was no dramatic final caravan, no last merchant locking the gates. It just faded, bit by bit, route by route. And meanwhile, something else was happening. Ships were getting better, bigger, more reliable. Turns out, when you're moving goods by sea and you don't need a dozen kingdoms to cooperate, you don't need to negotiate with warlords or pay off bandits at every mountain pass. You just sail around the problems. More cargo, less politics, way more profit. So merchants made a choice. They always do. The Silk Road didn't die with some grand catastrophe. It just stopped being worth it.